Three, yeah.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 26th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Our purpose is to demonstrate that people with different political opinions can find support among each other through civilized dialogue and a sincere desire to find common ground. Today's topic is one that tends to cause a deep division along party lines. Our panel is going to tackle the topic of income inequality. Our discussion panel today, beginning on my left, is Jerry Ritzman, Vice President and partner with Ritzman Natural Health Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, President of R&B Financial Services. And on his left is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Jerry, there's been a lot of discussion lately about the wage gap or the income gap between the highest earners and the lowest earners. In fact, the president recently said that income inequality would be one of the main issues of the remainder of his presidency. That frightens me a tad bit. I don't know about you. But the question that I have for you is, what do you think are some of the main causes of this income inequality or income gap?
Well, yeah, the drumbeat for income inequality is starting to be heard. And if there is income inequality, which there probably is, I hope that whomever addresses the issue or tries to solve the issue addresses the causes, not the symptoms. We can address the symptoms by money transfer through entitlement programs. But that doesn't really get to the root of the problem. And I don't want to blame the victim because some of the victims truly aren't at this stage responsible for the situation they're in. However, some or many of them might be responsible for their wage earning. But that's not what I want to concentrate on. You know, when this topic first came up and you mentioned that this was going to be it, the first thing I thought about is what are our priorities on a state, municipal, and regional basis. And I see so much of our resources from municipalities and regions going to things that will not get us back to prosperity. And if we get back to prosperity, I think the income inequality will decrease. But I see the Cleveland City Council pledging $3 million a year for 10 years to renovate Cleveland Brown Stadium, or First Energy Stadium.
Which is how old?
Which is, I don't know when it was built. It might be
within the last 10 years.
Right. Yeah. So they're pledging $30 million over 10 years. The sin tax in Cuyahoga County is going to generate $13 to $14 million a year for the next 10 to 15 years if it's renewed, and it has done that in the last 15 years. And that money has all gone to like the stadium and to renovate it and so forth. There's been a lot of money, and I don't know who's doing it. I couldn't find out whether it's the Playhouse Square Association or whether it's some city or regional governments to update Playhouse Square and put a big chandelier over the top of Euclid Avenue. I don't believe that we can entertain or play ourselves back to prosperity. I think that these funds that the state, the cities, and the municipalities are pledging to things like stadiums and other entertainment type complexes, and what are we doing with the money that we're getting from the casinos? I would propose that if Cleveland wants to invest that $13 million a year, that they ought to do it in some tuition. They could give $20,000 a year for 650 students, and they could say, okay, we'll use $20,000 a year for you, a student, and we'll pay your tuition to one of the 3 area state schools, Cleveland State, Akron, or Kent. Tuition there ranges anywhere from $9,500 up to about $9,800 a year, or to a technical school where the tuitions are higher, maybe in the area of $17,000 to $18,000. But they could also give other support with that $20,000 a year, as far as tutors, mentors, other support to help people transport or live at school, and then say, okay, we're going to do this, and we will forgive this if you stay and live in Cleveland proper for the next 10 years. For every year, we'll forgive 10% of that. That would address income inequality, I believe. One way to address it.
Okay, so your idea would be to bring it up from the bottom rather than put earnings limitations on the people at the top.
Absolutely. If we took a CEO and we took $1 million away from his compensation, and probably somebody that's in the area of $30 to $50 million compensation probably has at least 500 people working for that corporation. It's a guess. That would be about $38 a week for each of those 500 people for every $1 million that you reduced his compensation. And that's not going to raise anybody to the next income level.
Actually, before I get to Ron, let me throw this in. There's a lot of conversation. Whenever this conversation starts, there's something about CEOs making too much money. And there's some of them that it's unconscionable. But when you look at it at the top, I think last year being 2012, not 13, don't know what the 13 numbers are yet, the highest paid CEO in the country made $378 million in total comp. But the average for Fortune 500 CEOs was just a little bit under $1 million. The average company in the Fortune 500 had 58,000 employees. If you took all the income away from the CEO and divided up among the workers in that company, they get less than $20 a year. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out. Ron?
John D. Rockefeller, there's a story told about him. Someone approached him and says, why don't you share some of your money? He says, okay, everybody, if I share all my money, everybody would get a dime. Here's yours. So. Yeah.
I think he said something about now you've got the same start I had or something like that.
Something like that, you know. Yeah. Well, interesting, Jerry. The CEOs, I did a little reading on the history of all this. In 1965, the average CEO made 20 times the wage of his average worker. In 1987, he made 58 times. In 2012, 273 times. This is about the top 400 CEOs of the country. This is everybody, as you so easily put out. But yeah, raising the skill set on the end, that's an excellent idea. I would certainly agree with that. Again, I did a little studying of this, and income disparity was quite high up until the time of the Great Depression. Then things crashed a bit, and it got a little more level, and from 1930 to 1970, thereabouts, it became quite fairly even. The disparity was not nearly so much, and this can be attributed to strong unions, among other things, causing people to be responsive, raise the standard of living for union people and drag some non-union people along with that, many non-union people along with that. And this influenced government in terms of the taxation. The taxes for the wealthiest were up to 90% at some point. So since then, pre-1970, income came from capital and capital investments and interest payment, that thing. Since then, it's been more income-based. In other words, the CEOs making money from the companies, the stockbrokers making money from the arbitration kind of arbitrage things, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's the income disparity has increased remarkably, and since about 1970, it started going back up. I saw some graphs that showed that very clearly by whatever measure that you make. So, what are some of the solutions? Gee, I don't know.
Oh, Ron, that's not why we're here.
But I have some ideas.
Good.
And again, you say, yeah, this is a time to put some public resources, some government money into this, our money into this, and the better way to do that is to raise the skill sets, to raise the economic things. There are so many things going into this, so that this is, as you say, this is a symptom in some ways, not a cause. And some of those symptoms are that as this disparity gets great, what it's taking from is the middle class. really. So the middle class slips further below so that they require more government services, which then is paid for by the rest of the middle class. Middle economic classes. I hate to use class. We're supposed to be a class-free society in the United States. You know, that's one of those fictions we have. But so I think some of those things, being able to spread the money, redistribute the wealth, but redistribute it in ways that you alluded to, Jerry, not by bread and circuses, but by bringing, trying to bring the whole standard up by putting the money where it's going to be very effective.
Bryan, let me put it to you this way. I'm going to surprise you. I don't know what you were planning on saying, but I'm going to throw a curve at you. To what extent does the gap itself, now I'm not talking about being in poverty and all the reasons for we've lost unskilled jobs and high school dropout rates and all that and poverty, but the gap itself, what harm does it do? Does it really hurt the guy at the bottom that the guy at the top is making a lot more money than he is?
I don't believe it does. I think that whenever you involve the government in these particular types of problems, they only make it worse. Obviously, you mentioned that this has been it's going to be the focal point for the current administration. I think they're doing all they can to enter in class warfare. I don't think it helps the folks at the lower end when you start talking this way, because we're in a global, very competitive work environment. And we've seen companies, local companies, companies in the state, they'll take their business elsewhere. I mean, we are not competing with Indiana, we're not competing with Pennsylvania, we're competing with Thailand, we're competing with Sri Lanka. You know, that sounds kind of odd, but you know, there are jobs that are leaving the state of Ohio and our country because of this. Now they're starting to come back. Companies are starting to look and say, hey, wait a second, it's better, you know, it's more cost effective.
Because wages are going up in China.
Wages are going up in China, they're going up around the world, and they're making those determinations. And I think we only shoot ourselves in the foot when we start talking this way and throwing out these ideas that somehow an executive can only make a factor of what the lowest paid employee makes. So I believe, and I think Jerry has really hit it on the head. We are focusing on areas that are just totally symptomatic. And we really need to look at what are the issues, how do we bring up our skill set of those people? How do we train them? Let's spend some of those dollars. I'm just as appalled that the Cleveland City Council would spend another dime on that stadium. You know, I believe that the Cleveland Browns need to start winning, and when they start winning, and that's sort of the compensation matrix that we put on corporations. When you talk about total income, I think we need to take just a minute and explain that over the last several years, the government inserted itself in the compensation arena. And they said, in essence, we want to tie the fortunes of the executives and the employees to that of the shareholder. And so they moved everything around. No longer are there these very large salaries. What they have are bonus packages that when there's performance and they hit those targets, they get a bonus. So when you report that an executive made $373 million, I'd like to see how well that company did.
It did. It was Apple.
Yeah, and there you go. A lot of people made a lot of money in Apple. The shareholders, the stakeholders in that company, the individuals that work there. I think Apple has probably produced more millionaires as well as Microsoft than the government has. So I really, you know, it gets to be a little touchy when we start throwing around these terms like inequality. Let's work on the problems, and let's get those people that have a low skill set, let's get them up. I read a little piece in preparing for this, and it deals with the fast food chains. There's a group that is in the process, and they have been over the last 3 years, testing sort of a drive-up call center. So when you drive up to your local fast food and the person says, you know, how can I help you? That person might be in Montana. So they're taking away another employee. It's no longer an employee at the store. That's local wages that gets taxed locally. That person could be in another state. Who knows? It could be in another country. I don't know if you've ever called up for tech support for your Dell computer. I'm sorry, I don't want to mention names, but for any of your computers, you're getting someone in another country. So I think we really need to be careful when we start throwing around those terms, because government needs to be in partnership with and making opportunities and helping companies instead of being a major headwind to them. So that's sort of where I come down on this.
Patty, you've listened to a couple of sides of this discussion. Share with us where you're coming from.
Oh, well, you know, it was interesting. I read those same figures that Ron gave about the percentage of the average wage that the CEOs are making, and it's amazing to me. I do agree I do think, however, there is income inequality. And what's happening, I think, is we're seeing maybe the dismissal of the middle class. What we're finding is that the chances for a young American at these days to achieve that upper level are getting slimmer and slimmer. And the ability to be mobile in that position is getting smaller and smaller, because fewer are getting to the top, and those that are getting to the top are getting the lion's share of all the wealth. Bryan mentioned the fast food workers, and you know, I'm very much in favor of raising the minimum wage. And the reason is, I think everyone deserves to have at least what it would be a livable wage. The wage at the fast food places is not livable. Now, I've heard it as argument to that the average worker at a McDonald's, at a Burger King, at a whatever, is a teenager or just somebody doing a second job. The average age of a person working at a fast food restaurant now is 29, and that's the average age.
Really?
Yes. I mean, it's not your typical, you know, high school teenager trying to get an extra job. These are people that are not making enough money, and unfortunately their only skill level is they can't go out and get this job or that job. They have to do something that is basically a non-skilled position. So to ask them to receive a minimum wage, you know, that is livable, I don't think is out of line. And to say that, well, if we don't keep the wages low, the company will move to China or whatever. You know, yes, that's because they're greedy, and they don't see the value in giving a person a livable wage. Ron mentioned unions. That was one of the big reasons there was equality, because unions fought for, and no matter what your opinion, they fought originally, and to this day in some cases, for what is fair for an employee, that you receive what you deserve for that job. I don't think, you know, former union president, I didn't want to get an overinflated amount of money, but I felt that we deserved something that was fair. With more right-to-work states, with the decrease in unions, you're seeing that middle class diminish, because those people are bringing in less and less and less, while the corporate executive is making more and more and more. That is a concern to me. But I do like your idea as far as education, Jerry.
Let's let Jerry go first.
Now, Patty, what would you define as a livable wage here in Wadsworth?
A livable, you know,
A livable wage. Just what would you?
Probably 30,000.
30,000. So that would be
20 to 30.
That would be
I don't know
that we would,
exactly.
The minimal. I mean, a livable wage. I don't think 20 would be a livable wage for one person to live on their own.
It would be tight. Yes.
Yeah, it would be very tight.
Yes.
I would say 30 would be minimum, and so we're talking $15 an hour. What do you think would happen if the minimum wage now went to $15 an hour?
There'd be some new real estate on the north end of town because the restaurants would go out of business.
I don't know that they'd go out of. Why would they go out of business?
They have to increase the price of their product, and when you increase the price, demand goes down.
Well, exactly, but how much are they going to increase the product? I mean, when you look, I don't think it's that great. I remember, this was actually during the healthcare debate, and one of the large pizza chains was saying that they couldn't afford health care because they'd have to raise their prices. They would have had to raise the price of their pizzas 25 cents. 25 cents. That would not have made a difference between a person buying a pizza or not, but it would make a difference in
on top of
affordable
that,
health care.
you throw in another $7 an hour to the worker that delivered or made the pizza and all. Well, let me ask you this. I think that when we talk about shipping jobs overseas, we have jobs, we're buying products that are made overseas that we wouldn't buy if they were made here. When you look at all of our nice little electronic gadgets that we have, if they were made in a union shop in Detroit, the price would be such that no one would buy them, which means there wouldn't be a union shop in Detroit. People talk about folks in the third world making pennies a day. Well, it's not that anymore. But still in all, I think we're talking about the right thing, is how do we bring up the financial wherewithal at the people at the bottom, and it's to help them produce more.
Ron mentioned education, and I think that is Jerry mentioned education, and I think that is important. There's obviously connections between the education level of a person and the job they obtain and the income that they earn. I think we need
into the whole thing of family stability as well.
Right, and we need to make, first of all, we need to make college affordable, because while Jerry's idea is great, not everybody has a casino in their backyard that they can draw the money from. Not all communities do. College tuition is just absolutely out of the world. Kids are graduating with $30,000 in debt before they even start a job. That's ridiculous. I also think we need to go back to more trade schools. My father, he graduated from high school in 1940, and he immediately went into an apprentice program as a machinist. He took classes at Akron U as part of that apprentice program, and then parlayed that job into other things that he did. But we don't see those apprenticeship programs. We don't see the skills, the trades.
The programs are there, people aren't taking
advantage of. Yeah. Well, one of the things, even in the high school, we have a vocational program. We have a number of vocational programs, which are excellent. And they actually lead to very good paying jobs. Everyone has the feeling, this is one of my prejudices, I don't think everybody should go to college.
No, I agree.
I don't think that they're learning skills that can translate to a job.
Yeah.
Patty, I listened to an executive from a Cleveland-based company that sells and services lift equipment like front-end loaders and things like that for industrial and warehouse use. And somebody asked him, what's your biggest challenge right now? And he says, my biggest challenge is finding workers who can repair and keep this equipment running. He says, we spend so much resources training new people, to do this, and that it's the lack of the people to do it is his biggest challenge.
One thing that one thing that Henry Ford did when he had doubled the salaries of his workers are getting compared to everybody else was he maintained his workforce. Because if you're making that much money, you're not going to go to somebody else right away.
Not only that, now you can buy a Model T Ford.
Yeah. It's a very now his workers didn't make enough to immediately run out and buy a Model T Ford. They'd have to save up, but that kept them on the job because they were well paid and they were
he was hated by the competition for doing that.
They were trained and they would stay there, and he needed that.
And I think that Jerry is probably on the front lines when it comes to these particular issues, because I would dare say that when he hires an employee, he's looking for someone that has ambition, that is willing to learn, that is loyal, that will come to work when they're supposed to. They'll give him a day's of labor for an honest pay, and that they'll progress throughout the company, and that their pay will increase with that. We have a particular element that basically says, I'm awfully sorry that you have to work at a fast food restaurant, but there's certain decisions that you've probably made that have put you on that track. So let's try to work with those people and say, let's have a government and a private sector partnership that gives them these skills. There was, 2 years ago, there was a report, an investigative report, just in Akron. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars being wasted because people were coming to this big room, they were taking attendance, and that's all they were doing. And, and the city and the state, and different agencies were collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they were supposed to be training these people for interviewing, for word processing, and all those types of things. We really have to work on getting these people up.
In the minute or so we got left, I wanted to throw this on the table, but going back to the other end, at the top, when somebody is making a tremendous amount of money, they're not spending that on themselves. They're not going out and eating more food or buying more clothes necessarily. They're investing it. It takes about $200,000. This is where it came, the Department of Labor number, I think. It takes about $200,000 in capital to create one labor job that will pay $40,000 a year. And that if we try to take that capital away, that investment capital away, and pass it out at the bottom, the investment opportunities are gone. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I think that some of our CEOs are making enough that they can do both. I mean, I look at look at Bill and Melinda Gates.
Okay, the average is $900,000 a year. Well, then that's of the top 500.
Well, I think to Patty's argument, I think the sports athletes and some of these actors, if the actors are complaining about the starving actors and all those people that can't get in, why don't they take 25% of their $100 million or $200 million of film,
take it away,
throw that into a foundation so that they can help the starving, where they want the government to do that. So, the highest paid pitcher is $200 million. What was it? It's crazy.
Well, moving along, thank you very much. This was a good discussion, and as usual, it could go on for a long time. I want to thank everybody who is joining us in this, and I'd like to leave you with a quote from Confucius. Confucius said, "In a country well governed, poverty is something to be ashamed of. In a country badly governed, wealth is something to be ashamed of." You agree with that, Ron? I know you do. Thank you, gang.